morning. Quite a hard act to follow there, isn't it? Thank you for the privilege of having me to speak on this most serious, almost sacred occasion as we gather to commemorate and pay tribute to all New Zealanders, Navy, Army, Air Force and Merchant Marine, who have given their lives in the service of this country. And I note and pay tribute to all New Zealand servicemen and servicewomen recently and presently serving overseas in places such as Afghanistan, East Timor, and the Middle East. We salute their courage and commitment to this country and the countries in which they have served. As well, on this very day, our Australian cousins are commemorating Anzac Day in a style and accent similar to ours. There are few theatres of conflict we have not shared with our Australian allies, and so shared with them the awful business of war. I have attended and participated in many Anzac Day services, mostly in New Zealand, but also the United Kingdom, Australia, Singapore, Canada, and the United States. The form of Anzac Day services has been generally similar on all occasions, with representatives of the forces and returned servicemen and women marching together to a memorial. What follows is usually a commemoration that resembles a military funeral service. There are subtle differences between the ceremonies depending on the host country, but certainly the Australian and New Zealand services are very similar. We sing the appropriate hymns, we play the last post, share a minute's silence, which is ended by playing what we call the reveille. In due course, and after a brief speech, the service ends with the reading of the ode, and then after some prayers, we leave for a cup of tea or similar. It is a serious, solemn and dignified occasion, as it should be. But I've recently wondered just from where parts of the ceremony which we include and with which we are so familiar are derived. As a sailor, I pondered on the last post and its relevance to a ceremony which commemorates men and women of all armed forces. Just what, I thought, does the reveille represent, and why do we include it? Similarly, the ode, which holds a special place for us, and ends with a ringing affirmation of our intention to not forget those who have died. Where does this come from, I wondered? And so I did some research on some of these items and found it all pretty interesting. Let's start with the last post. The last post call is used in some Commonwealth Army camps to signal the end of the day when the duty officer returns from a tour of the camp and quarters. The call first post is used to mark the start of the inspection. The name derives from the practice of inspecting all the sentry posts around such a camp at the end of the day and playing a call at each of them. The last post was thus the last point of this inspection. The call signalling that this post had been inspected marked the end of the military day. In addition to its normal garrison use, the last post call had another function. At the close of a day of battle, it signalled to those who were still out and wounded or separated that the fighting was done and to follow the sound of the call to find safety and rest. Its use has two generally unexpressed purposes. The first is an implied summoning of the spirits of the fallen to the cenotaph. The second is to symbolically end the day, so that the period of silence before the rouse is blown becomes in effect a ritualized night vigil. The rouse. The rouse is a bugle call, most often associated with the military and Commonwealth countries. It is commonly played following the last post at military services and is often mistakenly referred to as reveille. The rouse is actually a separate piece of music from the traditional reveille. The rouse was traditionally played following the reveille, which was played in the morning to wake soldiers up. The rouse would be played to get soldiers out of bed. The use of both the last posts and the rouse at cenotaph ceremonies in the Commonwealth nations essentially turns the period of silence into a ritualised night vigil. The selection of the rouse and the ceremony as arranged in the aftermath of the First World War also carries a subtle Christian reference to the Judgment Day and the implied hope that there will be one day when the living and dead arise together. Because of the close association between the two tunes, the rouse is commonly mistaken for reveille, and is taken on many of the functions reveille traditionally held in remembrance services due to its shorter length and ease with which it can be played. My next point of interest was the Ode of Remembrance, which is an ode taken from Lawrence Binion's poem For the Fallen, which was first published in the Times of London in September 1914. The poem in particular honoured the World War I British war deal at that time and the British Expeditionary Force, which by then had high casualty rates on the developing Western Front. The poem was published when the Battle of Marne was foremost in people's minds. Over time, the third and fourth stanzas of the poem, although often just the fourth, were claimed as a tribute to all casualties of war, regardless of state. The third stanza is a powerful statement of how young men were sent to fight a war of unimaginable horror. Just bear with me as I give it to you. They went with songs to the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eyes, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. We then follow with the fourth stanza so familiar to us all, repeating the last line, we will remember them, in a forceful way, reinforcing our resolve to always honour our promise. All are beautiful words, stunning in their simplicity and power, and entirely appropriate for our day of remembrance. And so perhaps at future Anzac commemorations, you might like to recall the symbolism of the bugle calls now established in the ceremony. Finally, on a rather selfish note, noting the colour of most of the participants in this ceremony today, and with greatest respect to the Anzac ceremony as it has evolved, I wonder if we could include an occasional naval flavour by use of a bosun's call to shrilly warble pipe down in place of the last post and call that hands. I suspect this is a discussion for another day. Thank you.